Alan Winters stepped carefully through the dense alien jungle of Proxima Centauri b. The air was thick with strange scents and the calls of unknown creatures. As a frontier scout, he was used to being alone in dangerous places. At 35 years old, with 10 years of experience mapping unexplored territories, Alan preferred working solo. Base camp, this is Winters. Day 3 of Northern Expedition. All systems normal, he said into his wrist communicator. The tiny device beeped in confirmation that his message was sent, even though he expected no immediate reply. Communications to the main colony took hours to process. Alan checked his scanner again. The device showed unusual readings ahead. A heat signature larger than anything he had encountered before on this planet. Most scouts would turn back upon seeing such data. Alan moved forward. The jungle grew quieter with each step. Even the constant buzzing of the flying insects stopped. Alan's hand moved to his pulse rifle, a standard-issue weapon that had saved his life many times before. "Something's watching me," he whispered to himself. The scanner beeped urgently. The heat signature was now less than 30 feet away, but the dense vegetation made visibility poor. Alan crouched behind a large purple-leafed plant and waited. Ground trembled slightly. Then Alan saw it, a creature that the colonists called a deathstalker. It stood over 8 feet tall, its body covered in obsidian scales that reflected the planet's blue sun in rainbow patterns. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that could slice through metal. Its elongated head housed rows of teeth and 4 eyes that glowed with a yellowish light. Alan's breath caught in his throat. Deathstalkers had killed 23 colonists since humans arrived 3 years ago. They were the apex predators of this world, feared by all. No one had ever survived a close encounter without heavy weapons or a vehicle. He remained perfectly still, knowing that running would trigger the predator's chase instinct. The Deathstalker moved forward, its nostrils flaring as it sampled the air. It was less than 15 feet away now. "Don't move, don't even breathe," Alan told himself. The creature stopped and turned its head directly toward Alan's hiding spot. Its 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and then it did something unexpected. It sat down on its hind limbs and tilted its head. Alan waited for the attack, but minutes passed, and the creature simply watched him. Slowly, keeping his eyes on the Deathstalker, Alan stood up. "You can see me, can't you?" he said softly. The creature's bioluminescent markings along its spine pulsed with blue light. Its front limbs remained relaxed, not positioned for attack. After 20 tense minutes, Alan decided to retreat. He took 1 slow step backward, then another. The Deathstalker stood but didn't charge. Instead, when Alan was about 50 feet away, it began to follow him, maintaining that exact distance. By nightfall, Alan reached a small clearing where he set up camp. The Deathstalker remained at the edge of the clearing, watching. Alan built a fire and prepared his meal, constantly aware of the predator's presence. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered while eating his ration pack. "You should have attacked hours ago." The creature's markings pulsed again, almost as if in response to his voice. Alan slept in short bursts that night, his hand on his rifle. Each time he woke, he found the Deathstalker in exactly the same position, watching him with unblinking eyes. Morning came with a heavy rain. Alan packed his camp and continued his mapping mission. The Deathstalker followed, still keeping the same careful distance. This pattern continued for 3 days. The creature never approached closer than 50 feet, but never fell behind. When Alan stopped to collect plant samples, it waited. When he climbed hills for better survey positions, it found its own path up. On the 4th day, Alan was crossing a narrow ridge when the ground beneath him began to crumble. A landslide was starting, and he was directly in its path. He scrambled for safer ground, but the earth gave way beneath his feet. As he began to fall, something powerful grabbed the back of his gear harness. The Deathstalker had moved with incredible speed, covering the 50 feet between them in seconds. It pulled Alan to safety as tons of rock and soil crashed down where he had stood moments before. Once on solid ground, the creature immediately backed away to its usual distance, Alan stared at it in disbelief. "You saved me," he said. "Why would you do that?" The Death Stalker's markings pulsed in patterns of blue and green. Its 4 eyes blinked in sequence again. Alan pointed to himself. "Alan," he said clearly. Then he pointed to the creature. "I think I'll call you Shadow." At the sound of the name, the creature's head tilted again. That evening, Alan made an emergency call to the colony's science division. "This is Scout Winters requesting immediate connection with Dr. Morgan." After a long delay, the stern face of Dr. Lydia Morgan appeared on his portable screen. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly and her expression was impatient. "Winters, you're supposed to be mapping the northern valleys, not making social calls," she said. "Doctor, I've made contact with a Deathstalker," Alan explained quickly. "It's been following me for 4 days without attacking. Today it saved my life during a landslide." Dr. Morgan's expression changed from annoyance to intense interest. "Are you certain? That behavior contradicts everything we know about these creatures." "I'm looking at it right now," Alan replied, turning the camera to show Shadow sitting at the edge of his camp. "It keeps exactly 50 feet away unless I'm in danger." "This is unprecedented," Dr. Morgan said. "You need to capture it or eliminate it and bring the body back for study." Alan turned the camera back to his face. "With all due respect, Doctor, I'm not going to do either of those things. This creature is showing signs of intelligence and possibly even empathy." "Don't be ridiculous." "Winters, it's an animal," Morgan snapped. "A predator that has killed colonists." "So have we killed them," Alan replied. "I'm going to continue observation and documentation. This could change everything we understand about life on this planet. I'm ordering you to capture or kill that specimen, Scout," Morgan said firmly. Alan shook his head. "I'll complete my mapping mission with Shadow following me, and I'll document everything, but I won't harm this creature. Winters out." He disconnected the call before she could respond. That night, as Alan sat by his fire, he noticed Shadow was closer than usual, maybe 40 feet away now. "You're getting braver, aren't you?" he said. He tossed a piece of his ration meat in the creature's direction. Shadow approached it cautiously, sniffed it, but didn't eat. Instead, the creature disappeared into the jungle and returned 10 minutes later with a large purple fruit in its mouth. It placed the fruit on the ground halfway, between them, and backed away. Alan understood the gesture. He walked to the fruit, picked it up, and took a small bite. It was sweet and familiar, one of the safe fruits that colonists had identified for human consumption. "Thank you," he said. Shadow's markings pulsed brightly in the darkness, and Alan felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A connection. Somehow, against all odds, he had made a friend on this dangerous world. The deadliest creature known to the colonists was following him like a puppy, and Alan had no idea why, but he was determined to find out. Alan Winters returned to Proxima Colony after completing his 3-week mapping mission. The tall metal walls of the settlement looked unwelcoming after his time in the wilderness. Most surprising to him was that Shadow, the Deathstalker that had followed him for weeks, stayed with him right to the edge of the colony's perimeter. "Stay here," Alan told the creature, pointing to the ground. "I'll come back." Shadow's bioluminescent markings pulsed in response. The creature settled onto its 4 back limbs, its front pair relaxed but ready. At the colony gate, Security Chief Paige Russell stared in disbelief at the Deathstalker waiting just beyond weapon range. "Winters, there's a killer beast behind you," she said, raising her rifle. Alan stepped into her line of fire. "Lower your weapon. That Deathstalker has been with me for 3 weeks without a single aggressive move." "That's impossible," Paige said, but she lowered her rifle slightly. "I need to speak with Dr. Morgan immediately," Alan insisted. Inside the colony's science building, Dr. Lydia Morgan listened to Alan's report with growing skepticism. Her office was filled with preserved specimens of Proxima's wildlife, including a Deathstalker head mounted on the wall. "You expect me to believe this predator followed you like a pet?" she asked. Alan showed her his datapad with videos he had recorded. "It's all here. Shadow saved my life twice. Once during the landslide I reported, and again when a swarm of venom flies attacked my camp." Dr. Morgan's assistant, A young xenobiologist named Frank Carter leaned forward with interest. Unlike Morgan, whose gray hair and permanent frown showed her many years of hardened scientific work, Frank's eyes were wide with excitement. "Did you say it responded to a name?" Frank asked. "Yes. I call it Shadow," Alan replied. "It recognizes the word now." Dr. Morgan shook her head. "Coincidence. These creatures are mindless killers. The Colony Council will never approve continued contact with it." "Then I quit," Alan said firmly. "I'm going back out there." "Wait," Frank interrupted. "Dr. Morgan, this could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. If Winters is right, we could learn how to communicate with the dominant species on this planet." Dr. Morgan's frown deepened, but she nodded slowly. "Fine. Carter, you go with Winters. Document everything. But if that creature shows any sign of aggression, you kill it immediately." Frank grinned. "Thank you, Doctor. We won't let you down." Outside, the colony gates. Alan was relieved to find Shadow still waiting exactly where he had left him. Frank followed nervously behind. "Amazing," Frank whispered. "It really did wait for you." Alan approached Shadow slowly. "Hey there, big guy, this is Frank. He's going to help us understand each other better." Shadow's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, focusing on Frank, who stood frozen in fear. "Stay calm," Alan advised. "No sudden movements." Over. The next 2 weeks, Alan and Frank set up a research camp 5 miles from the colony. Each day they conducted experiments to test Shadow's intelligence and behavior. They discovered the creature could understand simple commands, recognize patterns, and even use basic tools when shown how. "Look at this," Frank said one evening, showing Alan readings from his scanner. "Shadow's brain structure has similarities to both predators and highly social pack animals. I think the Deathstalkers aren't solitary hunters as we believed." "What are you suggesting?" Alan asked. "I think they're social creatures who've lost their packs to human expansion," Frank explained. "When we started mining operations in the Northern Territories, we might have destroyed their social groups." The next day, Alan fell ill with a fever common to Proxima settlers. He lay in his tent, too weak to move. Frank was away collecting samples when Shadow entered the camp and approached Alan's tent, the closest the creature had ever come to him voluntarily. Shadow dropped several blue-leafed plants by the tent opening. Frank returned to find Alan chewing on the leaves, his fever already breaking. The native settlers mentioned these plants as medicine, but we never identified which ones, Alan explained. Shadow knew exactly what I needed. Even more remarkable was what happened 3 days later. Shadow began acting strangely, pacing and making low growling sounds. Alan checked his equipment but found no threats. "Something's wrong," he said to Frank. Suddenly, Shadow pushed both men to the ground. Seconds later, a massive tree crashed down where they had been standing. The tree showed no signs of decay. It had been healthy. "It knew the tree would fall before our equipment could detect it," Frank said in amazement. That evening, Colony. Director Greg Bennett arrived at their camp in a transport vehicle. His clean uniform and perfectly combed hair looked out of place in the wilderness. "Dr. Morgan told me about your pet monster," Bennett said, not bothering to hide his dislike. "This little science project ends now. The Interstellar Resources Corporation wants to expand mining operations in the Northern Territories." "That's Shadow's home range," Alan protested. Bennett shrugged. "We didn't cross light years to make friends with the wildlife, Winters. We came here for resources." After Bennett left, Frank looked troubled. "There's something I need to show you," he said, pulling out his datapad. "I accessed some restricted files. The corporation has been capturing Deathstalkers for months. The files showed images of captured creatures in steel cages, scientists in protective gear taking samples and performing tests. They discovered the Deathstalkers produce a unique biological compound," Frank explained. "It could revolutionize medicine back on Earth. That's the real reason for the mining expansion. They're hunting Shadow's kind." Alan felt sick. "We have to do something." That night, as they discussed options, Shadow approached their campfire, closer than ever before. The creature's markings pulsed in complex patterns. "I wish we could understand what it's trying to tell us," Alan said. Frank studied the patterns carefully. "These aren't random," There's a sequence repeating. The next morning, they began a new series of tests. They showed Shadow simple symbols and tracked how the creature's markings changed in response. It's communication, Frank confirmed after analyzing the data. The bioluminescent patterns are a language. Shadow seemed to grow more comfortable with their presence each day. When Alan offered food, the creature no longer backed away but took it gently from his hand. If we can prove Deathstalkers are intelligent and communicate, Alan said, the corporation can't treat them like animals. There are laws protecting sentient species. Frank nodded, but looked unsure. It won't be easy convincing people. Deathstalkers have killed colonists, usually after we invaded their territory, Alan pointed out. 1 week later, they had a breakthrough. Shadow led them to a small clearing where strange marks were carved into several trees. These aren't random, Alan said, tracing the symbols. They're too precise, too intentional. Frank took samples and scans. If Deathstalkers made these, it could be proof of symbolic thinking, a key indicator of higher intelligence. As they worked, Shadow suddenly grew alert. Its markings flashed rapidly in warning patterns they had learned to recognize as danger. Something's coming, Alan whispered, reaching for his rifle. Through the trees, they saw a colony security team approaching, led by Paige Russell. Behind them was Dr. Morgan. Alan Winters, Paige called out. By order of Colony Director Bennett, you are to return to the colony immediately. The creature is to be contained for research purposes. Shadow moved closer to Alan, its markings pulsing, quickly. Stay calm, Alan told the creature. We'll figure this out. Frank stepped forward, looking nervous. Alan, there's something I need to tell you. Before he could continue, Dr. Morgan spoke. Mr. Carter has been reporting to me daily. We know all about your discoveries. Alan turned to Frank in shock. You've been spying on us? Frank couldn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry, Alan. I work for Interstellar Resources. They want a live, cooperative specimen. Your work with Shadow is exactly what they need. Betrayal cut through Alan like a knife. As security officers moved forward with capture nets and tranquilizer guns, Shadow's markings flashed intensely. The creature wasn't running away. It was standing its ground, ready to protect Alan despite the danger to itself. Shadow, run, Alan shouted, but it was too late. A tranquilizer dart hit the creature's neck. As Shadow collapsed, its 4 eyes remained fixed on Alan, filled with what could only be described as trust that was now broken. Deadliest alien beast follows human. Like a puppy, Part 3. Alan Winters struggled against the grip of 2 security officers as Shadow was loaded onto a transport vehicle. The Deathstalker's massive body lay still, affected by the powerful tranquilizer. You can't do this, Alan shouted at Frank. He trusted us. Frank Carter avoided eye contact. It's for the greater good, Alan. The compounds we can extract from Deathstalkers could save millions of lives on Earth. Paige Russell secured Alan's hands with restraints. You're under colony arrest for interfering with corporate operations, Winters. The transport vehicle carrying Shadow sped away toward the colony, while Alan was forced into a second vehicle. He watched helplessly as the unconscious creature disappeared from view. At the colony, Alan was placed in a small detention cell. The bare room contained only a bed and toilet. Through a small window, he could see the science building where he knew they had taken Shadow. Hours later, the cell door opened, and Carla White entered. Carla was the colony's linguist, a woman in her early 30s with short blonde hair and kind eyes that now looked troubled. You have 5 minutes, the guard said before closing the door. Are you okay? Carla asked. They took Shadow, Alan replied. I need to help him. Carla nodded. I know. Frank brought me his data on the Deathstalkers' communication patterns. He asked me to help develop a translation matrix. She lowered her voice. But I don't trust what they're planning to do with it. Frank betrayed me, Alan said bitterly. He may have, Carla agreed, but he's also conflicted. He told me to give you this. She slipped a small device into Alan's hand, a security keycard. Why are you helping me? Alan asked. Carla's expression turned serious. Because I've seen the restricted labs. What they're doing to those creatures? She shuddered. It's not right. After Carla left, Alan waited until night fell. Using the key card, he unlocked his cell door and moved quietly through the darkened corridors of the detention center. Avoiding the night guards was easier than he expected. His years as a scout had taught him to move silently. Outside, the colony was mostly quiet. A few late workers moved between buildings, but no one paid attention to Alan as he kept to the shadows. He made his way to the science building where the security was much tighter. Using Carla's keycard again, he gained access to a side entrance. Inside, he followed signs to the Special Research Wing, an area he had never been allowed to enter before. As he moved deeper into the facility, he began to hear sounds that made his blood run cold, the pained cries of deathstalkers. The sounds were unlike anything he had heard in the wild. These were creatures in agony. Through a window in a laboratory door, Alan saw something that stopped him in his tracks. 3 deathstalkers were strapped to tables, their bodies cut open as scientists, in protective gear, extracted fluids from organs. The creatures were alive and conscious, their bioluminescent markings flashing in patterns that Alan now recognized as distress signals. Fighting the urge to vomit, Alan moved on. He had to find Shadow. At the end of a long hallway, he found a heavily secured door marked Behavioral Conditioning. The keycard worked and Alan slipped inside. The room was large with several observation stations surrounding a central containment area. In that area, Shadow was awake but confined by energy barriers. The creature's markings were pulsing rapidly, in patterns that Alan had never seen before. Dr. Morgan stood at a control panel with Frank beside her. They were watching Shadow's reactions to images projected on a wall, pictures of human colonists. Each time Shadow did not respond with aggression to the images, it received a painful shock. "We need to break its connection to Winters," Dr. Morgan was saying. "Once it sees all humans as enemies again, we can extract the compounds more efficiently. Aggression increases production." Frank looked uncomfortable. "This seems unnecessary, Doctor. We could try communicating with it instead." "We're not here to talk to animals, Carter," Morgan snapped. "Director Bennett wants results." Alan had heard enough. He stepped into the room, making both scientists turn in surprise. "Stop this now," he demanded. "Winters, how did you get out?" Morgan reached for an alarm button, but Alan was faster. He grabbed her wrist and pushed her away from the controls. Shadow saw Alan and its markings immediately changed to the familiar patterns he had come to recognize as recognition, and what he believed was joy. Frank stepped between Alan and Morgan. "Alan, you don't understand what's at stake here. The compound these creatures produce could cure diseases we've fought for centuries." "At what cost?" Alan asked. "Look at him, Frank. Really look. Is this how we treat intelligent beings?" Before Frank could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Someone had noticed Alan's escape. "You need to leave," Frank said urgently. "Not without Shadow," Alan replied. Frank hesitated, then moved to the control panel. "I can lower the barriers, but only for a moment before the backup systems engage." As Frank worked the controls, Dr. Morgan pulled herself up and reached for a weapon in a nearby cabinet. "This is treason, Carter." The energy barriers around Shadow flickered and disappeared. The creature immediately bounded to Alan's side, positioning itself between him and Morgan. "Shadow, we need to go," Alan said. The Deathstalker understood. It moved toward the door, but Morgan raised her weapon. "I will not let years of research escape," she said, aiming at Shadow. Alan prepared to lunge at her, but Frank moved first, knocking the weapon from Morgan's hands. "Run," he shouted to Alan. Alan and Shadow fled into the corridor just as security teams began to flood the area. They ran toward the exit, but found the way blocked by armed guards. "This way," called a voice from a side passage. It was Carla. "I can get you out through the maintenance tunnels." Following her, they descended into the colony's underground system, a network of tunnels housing power lines, water pipes, and ventilation ducts. As they moved through the narrow spaces, Alan heard Carla's breathing becoming more labored. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she replied, though she didn't sound fine. "There's something else you need to know. While working on the translation matrix, I discovered something in the communication patterns. The Deathstalkers don't just communicate with each other. They're trying to communicate with us." Alan looked at Shadow, who walked beside him. "What are they saying?" "It's complex," Carla explained, "but the core message seems to be about territory and cooperation. I think they're trying to establish boundaries, places where humans can live without disrupting their society." "Their society?" Alan repeated. Carla nodded. "The evidence suggests they have organized social structures. The marks you found on the trees? They're boundary markers, like signs. After an hour of moving through the tunnels, they emerged far from the colony, on the edge of the forest. Dawn was breaking on the horizon. "What will you do now?" Carla asked. "Shadow was leading me somewhere before they captured us," Alan replied. "I think there are more of his kind. I need to find them." "The corporation won't stop hunting them," Carla warned. "They've invested too much in this research." Alan placed his hand gently on Shadow's side. The creature's markings pulsed calmly now, away from the stress of the laboratory. "Then we need proof that they're intelligent beings with rights," Alan said. "Enough proof that even Director Bennett can't ignore it." Shadow suddenly became alert, its 4 eyes focusing on something in the forest. Alan followed its gaze but saw nothing. "What is it?" he asked. The Deathstalker moved forward a few steps, then looked back at Alan, clearly wanting him to follow. "I think it wants to show us something," Carla said. Alan nodded. "Lead the way, Shadow." As they followed the creature deeper into the forest, Alan wondered what they would find. The betrayal he had experienced still burned inside him, but now there was something else too. Hope that they could stop the slaughter of Shadow's kind before it was too late. After several hours of travel, they reached a ridge overlooking a hidden valley. What they saw below made them stop in amazement. Dozens of Deathstalkers moved about in what appeared to be an organized settlement. Some were constructing shelters from fallen trees and vines. Others were teaching younger ones to hunt. It was a society, just as Carla had suggested. "My God," Carla whispered. "They're not just intelligent, they're civilized." Shadow's markings pulsed brightly as it looked down at its home. For the first time, Alan truly understood what they had discovered, and what was at stake if the corporation couldn't be stopped. Alan Winters and Carla White spent 2 days observing the Deathstalker settlement from a hidden position on the ridge. Shadow remained with them, occasionally going down to the valley to interact with its kind before returning. "Look at how they organize their activities," Carla said, making notes on her data pad. "There's a clear social structure." Alan nodded. "Some hunt, some build, some care for the young, just like a human community." Through her portable scanner, Carla recorded the bioluminescent patterns the creatures used to communicate with each other. "Their language is complex. I'm starting to identify patterns for danger, food, and territory." On the evening of the second day, Shadow became agitated. Its markings flashed in the warning pattern they had come to recognize. "Something's wrong," Alan said. They heard the sound of engines in the distance. Through his binoculars, Alan spotted 3 large transport vehicles moving toward the valley from the direction of the colony. "They found us," Carla said, her voice tight with fear. Shadow made a low rumbling sound and looked at Alan. The creature seemed to be waiting for his decision. "We have to warn the settlement," Alan said. "There must be 30 Deathstalkers down. They're including young ones." "But how?" Carla asked. "We can't just walk into their community." Alan looked at Shadow. "We don't have to. Shadow can warn them." He turned to the creature and pointed to the valley, then to the approaching vehicles. "Danger," he said clearly. "Warn them." Shadow's markings pulsed rapidly. It looked at the transports, then back at Alan. Without hesitation, the creature bounded down the slope toward the settlement. "Will they understand?" Carla asked. "I hope so," Alan replied. They watched as Shadow reached the settlement. The creature's markings flashed intensely as it moved among its kind. Within minutes, the Deathstalkers were mobilizing, gathering their young and moving toward the far end of the valley. "They're evacuating," Alan said with relief. But the evacuation wasn't fast enough. The transport vehicles reached the edge of the valley and stopped. Security teams poured out, led by Paige Russell. From the middle transport, Director Bennett emerged with Dr. Morgan. "We need to do something," Carla said. Alan checked his pulse rifle. "Stay here. If things go wrong, you'll need to get this evidence back to Earth." Before Carla could protest, Alan was moving down the slope toward the valley floor. He positioned himself between the security teams and the retreating Deathstalkers. "That's far enough," he called out. Paige raised her weapon. "Stand down, Winters. You're already facing charges." Director Bennett stepped forward. "I'm disappointed. Winters, you could have been part of something important. Instead, you've chosen to side with animals." "They're not animals," Alan replied. "They're intelligent beings with their own society. Look around you." Bennett glanced at the settlement with its structured shelters and cleared pathways. For a moment, doubt crossed his face. Dr. Morgan moved to his side. "Don't listen to him, Director. These are primitive nests, nothing more. The specimens are valuable but dangerous." As they argued, Shadow appeared at Alan's side. The security team raised their weapons, but before they could fire, a remarkable thing happened. Dozens of Deathstalkers emerged from the forest behind, the human group surrounding them. "Don't shoot," Alan shouted. "If you start firing, none of us will leave this valley alive." The Deathstalkers didn't attack. They stood in a circle, their markings flashing in synchronized patterns. Even to those who couldn't understand the language, the message was clear. This was a show of force, not an immediate threat. "What do they want?" Bennett asked, his voice shaking slightly. "The same thing any intelligent species wants," Alan replied. "To be left alone to live in peace." Carla had joined them, carrying her datapad. "I can prove they're intelligent," she said. "I've been recording their communication patterns. They have a language as complex as any human one." Dr. Morgan scoffed. "Biological responses, nothing more." As if to answer her, Shadow stepped forward. It moved to a clear patch of ground and, using its claws, began to draw in the soil. The lines formed rough but recognizable shapes: a circle for the sun, a square for the colony, and a series of lines connecting them. "It's making a map," Carla said in amazement. Shadow drew a line around one section of the map and looked at Bennett. The message was unmistakable. "This is our territory." Bennett stared at the drawing. "This is impossible." "No," Alan said. "It's just outside your expectations. Shadow has been trying to communicate with us from the beginning. All of them have." Frank Carter pushed his way through the security team. "He's right, Director. I've reviewed all the data. The Deathstalkers show every sign of sophisticated intelligence. Tool use, symbolic thinking, complex social structures. And the markers we found in the forest," Carla added. "They're boundary signs. They've been trying to establish territories, so we could coexist." Bennett looked from the humans to the Deathstalkers surrounding them. The creatures remained in position, waiting. It was a standoff that could end in bloodshed for both sides. "Even if what you say is true," Bennett said, slowly, "the corporation has investments to protect. The medical compound these creatures produce could be worth billions. There may be another way," Frank suggested. "If we can communicate with them, perhaps we can negotiate, find a solution that respects their intelligence but still allows for research." "Negotiation requires recognition of rights," Alan pointed out. "Are you prepared to acknowledge them as an intelligent species with rights to their own land?" The valley grew quiet as Bennett considered. Even the Deathstalkers seemed to be waiting for his answer. Finally, he sighed. "I need to consult with the corporation board. Until then, no action will be taken against these creatures." He turned to Dr. Morgan. "Shut down the extraction program immediately." Morgan started to protest, but Bennett silenced her with a raised hand. "That's an order, Doctor." As the security team began to withdraw, Shadow moved to Alan's side. Its markings pulsed in a pattern that Carla had identified as contentment. "You did it," Carla said to Alan. "You saved them." For now, Alan replied. But this isn't over. 3 weeks later, a new protocol was established between the colony and the Deathstalker community. With Carla's developing translation matrix and Shadow's willingness to serve as an intermediary, basic communication became possible. The corporation, faced with irrefutable evidence of Deathstalker intelligence, agreed to recognize their rights to specific territories. In exchange, some Deathstalkers voluntarily provided samples of their biological compounds, which researchers learned could be harvested without harm to the creatures. Alan was appointed as the human ambassador to the Deathstalker community, a position he accepted with both pride and humility. Frank, seeking to make amends for his betrayal, worked alongside Carla to improve the translation matrix. On the day the formal agreement was signed, Alan stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. Shadow was beside him, its massive form now a familiar comfort rather than a source of fear. "I still don't understand why you followed me that first day," Alan said, knowing the creature couldn't fully answer such a complex question. Shadow's markings pulsed in a new pattern. Carla, checking her translation matrix, smiled. "What did it say?" Alan asked. "It's not perfect," Carla cautioned, "but the closest translation would be recognized kin." "Kin?" Alan repeated in surprise. "Shadow thought I was family?" "Perhaps. Not literally," Carla explained. "But there's something in your behavior or scent that registered as familiar to Shadow. In a world where its kind was being hunted, it found something in you it could trust." As the sun began to set over the valley, Alan placed his hand gently on Shadow's side. The creature that had once been considered the deadliest predator on Proxima Centauri b leaned slightly into his touch. Two different species from different worlds had found understanding where others had seen only fear and opportunity for exploitation. It was a small beginning, but perhaps the start of something much larger. Shadow's markings glowed brightly in the dimming light, forming a pattern that the translation matrix now recognized clearly. It was the simplest message, but perhaps the most important one across any language in the universe. "Friend,